Welcome to another edition of the 11th Ohio Cavalry's YouTube page. Today we're going to talk about how to saddle and how to vault on your mount. According to Poinsett's tactics, vaulting is one of those things that the guys back then did quite frequently to water their horses, to do a lot of other things. It's something that's kind of lost in the reenacting community today because a lot of us are either old enough that we can't do it, young enough that we can't quite do it. But it's one of those things that if you can, it adds to your authenticity and it helps you be able to water your horses without having to saddle and go down to the stream. According to Poinsett, how you vault on your mount is you place your left hand on the mane and right above the withers of your mount or your horse, and you take your right hand and you hold the reins. Now, according to Poinsett, then it says you put a little bit of weight on your wrist and your hands, and you gently and lightly swing your leg over the back of the horse. For most of us, I don't think it's going to be as light and as gentle as the original soldiers back then were, but to demonstrate it real quick, ideally this is about how it should look. Left hand, have the mane, right hand, have the withers. Get ready and just vault onto the horse. Again, not something a lot of reenactors do nowadays, but it's something that is valuable to be able to, number one, increase your authenticity like the original guys were able to do, and number two, save time when watering your horses. The next thing we're going to talk about is the manner of saddling according to Poinsett. Some of the differences in Poinsett has to do with whether you are light cavalry or heavy cavalry, some of the blanket differences in how you roll your bedroll and how you roll some of your other things. But for this lesson, we're going to kind of stick with the basics. Your saddle blanket should be folded into 6 thicknesses. After that, you place the biggest fold on the withers of the horse. And Poinsett is very direct in specifying that you should maneuver the blanket forward and then pull back so the hairs of the horse's back are not matted or in the wrong grain or the wrong direction. So again, one thing you can do, go a little bit further up, okay, and then pull a little bit back on the saddle blanket to make sure that the hairs of the back of the hairs of the horse are laying as they should in the grain of how the hairs grow. The next thing, as far as putting the saddle on, Poinsett is very specific on throwing the stirrup and the girth. Gotta love the Wyoming wind here. Throwing the stirrup and the girth over the seat of the saddle, and with both hands coming up from the rear of the horse and laying the saddle on. So again, I'll rearrange my blanket, see if it stays there, and with both hands, come up, around, and place it on the back of the horse. Normally it's a little bit quicker because here in Wyoming we have to be quick or our saddle blanket blows away. But also Poinsett is very specific to say that you don't seat it up on the withers yet because you want to put the crupper on without having to undo the crupper. So what I do is I go ahead, let everything down, and I go ahead and I put the crupper on. And again, Poinsett is very specific to make sure you don't have any hair left underneath the crupper as to agitate the horse. Then you slide it up to seat it right where it seats on the withers of the horse, and then you continue to girth or to tighten the saddle. Again, I'm going to readjust my blanket because the wind blew it. So the next thing we do is you grab our main girth, go underneath, and when it comes to horses, one thing, those of you who have horses, you know, there's a lot of opinions out there on how you saddle, how you girth, how tight it's supposed to be. Poinsett doesn't go as in depth as what a lot of people would like, but the biggest rule of thumb is it doesn't have to be super tight. If you're a good rider and you know how to mount, and you know how to ride, you don't need it super tight. In fact, we've had some people ride around in battle and not realize that they hadn't fully tightened their cinch yet, or their girth yet. So you don't need it super, super tight. So go ahead, get it fairly snug. And then how these saddles are designed is they have holes that you just buckle it. And I'm a big proponent of tying up all your loose ends. Having a whole bunch of leather and ropes hanging off you is not a cool thing to look like. After that, I go around the horse. I make sure my surcingle is placed where it should, right behind the main girth. And then I tighten my surcingle. Now again, Poinsett isn't very specific on exactly where the surcingle or where the buckle itself should be, but most reenactors, they like to make sure that the soft part of the surcingle is underneath the horse, protecting the horse, and as the rider, you just deal with the leather on top at the seat of the saddle. So again, I got the soft part of the surcingle down here, right behind the main girth, and come up, again, fairly snug, but not overly tight. And again, make sure you tuck in all your loose ends. That's ideally how you're supposed to do that. Also, one thing to note is the surcingle is not an optional thing. It's not like a rear cinch or a rear girth on Western saddles today that you could argue is not necessary. It's one of those things that it is a safety device. It is something that is kind of a safety concern. So make sure you put your surcingle on there. After that, you are basically saddled and ready to go. Again, I go on the other side. I make sure all my loose ends are tucked in, tightened, and there's not just straps hanging everywhere. But ideally, it's that quick. It doesn't have to be a big deal. According to Poinsett, the manner of packing the effects on the horse starts with fastening the cloak and the forge sack on the pommel and tightening the straps. You attach the forge cord, rolled and twisted into a circle to the left pack strap. When nose bags are used, they will be attached to the pommel on the off side. The next thing we're going to talk about is the manner of putting the effects on your saddle. There again, there's a lot of rumors and where your ropes go, where your lead rope's tied to, where your coat straps go, where your gum blanket goes. There's a lot of rumors, but basically Poinsett's, it's specific on a few things, but the rest of it leaves up to whatever you want to do as a campaigner. So I'll cover what it specifically says, and after that, it's whatever you think would be most appropriate as a reenactor in the field. So the first thing is we're going to cover the manner of rolling the cloak in a different video, or maybe even this is the same one, but of course this has kind of came undone a little bit. But how Poinsett says you need to put the cloak on is on the very front of the saddle. It needs to be centered and as tight as possible. So what you need to do is make sure that when you put it on your saddle, it's not loose. Again, military effects, especially on a saddle, need to be as tight as possible. So what I do, and this is, I guess, not really in the manual, it's just something that I've learned and it works for me, is I start with the first one in the center of the saddle to just keep it on there, and then I go to the outside ones and get them as tight as possible. Now, what getting it tight does is, of course, it holds it together, but also more importantly, it picks up the coat off of the neck or the withers of the horse because of how the pommel and the cantle are arranged. They basically pick it up to where it just doesn't ride on the withers of the horse. So again, I get it as tight as possible. Then I go on the other side. Of course, his head is on his lead rope right now, but come here. Get on the other side, again, tie it. Get this outside one, again, as tight as possible, okay? And then I come back to the center one, making sure everything looks good, and I get that, again, as tight as possible. Now, one thing reenactors do, I don't know if it's a reenactorism or if it's not specified in Poinsetts or Cooks, But with the tails of these, I tend to roll them kind of like a cinnamon roll inside of the buckle itself. It tends to keep the tails out of the way of the saddle and the other effects that you may be riding with, but it's not something that is specified in the manual. I might show you a close-up here in a little bit. But that is a kind of a sloppy way of doing it, but it's supposed to look a little cleaner than that. But that's where your greatcoat or your overcoat is supposed to be. Now, as far as your bedroll, all of your personal effects generally go in your bedroll. We'll cover how to roll the bedroll here in a little bit, but the bedroll goes on the rear. Again, what you want it to do is be centered in the middle of the saddle. Now, poinsetts and, well, the general rule of thumb is that your bedroll should not be more than 6 inches in diameter, okay? So by the time you if you have extra pants, socks, personal effects, maybe some extra food, some rations, stuff like that, 6 inches is not a whole lot. You'll see a lot of reenactors with bedrolls that they can barely get their legs around when they're saddling. And why, if you're proud that you campaign, it's also you want to make sure you pack as light as possible. So you're looking 6 inches-ish and about 30 inches long as far as your bedroll. Again, we'll cover how to roll your bedroll here shortly. So again, place it in the center. Get that first one secure to where it doesn't kind of slide to one side or the other. Just get it tucked in there, and then I go on my outside straps and get those as tight as possible. Okay. Go on the other side. Here we go. Wants to walk off on me here. On the other side, get this as tight as possible. And again, what being tight does is it picks the bedroll off of the back of the horse, so where you don't get any sores on the back of the horse. And again, whether it's a reenactorism or not, I like rolling the tail ends inside the buckle to where it keeps it up and away, and not on the saddle seat to where it may rub you raw as well. So that's one thing I do there. Do it back here. Of course, it looks like I need to adjust my straps to where they're not this far back. But again, you kind of get the idea. So there we go. Okay, the next thing we're going to cover is Poinsett says your nose bag goes on the front offside ring. Again, for you non-horse people, the offside is the right side of the horse, the near side is the left side of the horse. So again, you put your nose bag on there, suck it up, and it hangs on the front right side or the front offside of the horse.
Now we're going to discuss the manner of rolling the cloak, the greatcoat or overcoat. The method of rolling the coat basically has you create a large rectangle with the sleeves and cape and excess toward the outside. This way, when rolled, the coat will easily bend in the shape of the pommel. This method will also work with civilian and infantry pattern coats as well as coats with capes. The cloak being entirely unfolded, the sleeves are laid flat and extended parallel to the two front edges of the cloak. Each one is then turned up and folded near the elbow so as to give a length of 3 feet 6 inches from one elbow to the other, the middle of the cloak remaining uncovered. The cape is then turned down over the sleeves in such a manner that the front edges may exactly cover those of the cloak. The lower extremity of the cloak is then turned up about 10 inches. The skirts are likewise turned toward each other so that they may touch the fold of the sleeves, and that, being folded a second time upon themselves, they may give into the cloak to form a rectangle. The lower extremity of the cloak is then turned up about 7 inches. And it is rolled as tightly as possible, commencing at the collar and pressing the knee upon it as it is rolled to hold it. The part of the cloak which is rolled is then introduced into the sort of pocket formed by the part which was turned back. Note that the overcoat or cloak, when rolled, should be about 30 inches long and about 5 inches thick. Now we're going to discuss the manner of rolling the blanket. The effects, which are the pants, blouse, books, shirts, towels, toothbrushes, anything like that, should be laid smoothly in the center of the blanket, the side edges of which should be turned toward each other, covering the effects so as to leave the blanket when rolled about 30 inches long. It should then be rolled, pressing with the knees as tightly as possible, confined in a pocket formed similar to that of the overcoat. The roll should not be over 6 inches thick.
Okay, ready? Okay. Oh, let's try that again. Yeah. Good the first time. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna call that good.